Hello, my name is Jane Macdonell. I'm the founder of the charity Harris Trust and I live in the Scottish Borders. I'd like to tell you about my son Harris, who died aged 19 in August 2020. This is an important story for all who work with young people, especially those in mental health services. In 2018, NHS Borders did a significant adverse event review about Harris's care after a life-threatening incident while under their care. In 2021, another review was done by NHS Borders following his death. In February 2025, 4.5 years after Harris's death, I gave evidence in court at a fatal accident inquiry that the Crown Office agreed to undertake at my request. A fatal accident inquiry is a public examination of the circumstances of a death in the public interest. FAIs are conducted before a sheriff following an investigation by the Procurator Fiscal. The sheriff is expected to publish his determination about Harris's case in June 2025. This video is about the facts of Harris's case and then my own thoughts, not given through a lawyer or a journalist, but my own views as Harris's mother. I was a consultant paediatrician and worked in the NHS for 30 years. I will also talk about some of the work of the Harris Trust and how you can support campaigning on issues through Scottish Autism. Until the end of 2017, Harris was a bright and active boy. He enjoyed playing music and sport and did well at school. He had a wonderful, quirky sense of humour and could make people laugh. No one, not even any of his teachers, ever raised any concerns about him. Then in January 2018, aged 16, he had a sudden and severe mental health crisis. He needed urgent psychiatric care for his own safety, but there were no beds available in any young person's unit in Scotland. Although Harris did not meet the criteria due to his young age, he was admitted to the adult psychiatric unit, Huntlyburn ward, under NHS Borders as a pragmatic move until a suitable bed became available. We didn't know how long that would be for. In court at the fatal accident inquiry, a hospital manager said that the usual length of stay until a young person's bed became available was 2 to 3 nights. Harris's stay was 9 nights. Harris became increasingly distressed because of the adult patients. They frightened him. He did not feel safe there. His mental health deteriorated even further. After 8 days in Huntlyburn, while on a home visit, he made a suicide attempt as he did not want to return to Huntlyburn. The emergency services were called and he was taken back to Huntlyburn. This incident was reported by nursing staff to the consultant psychiatrist on call that afternoon. She advised a medical review to assess Harris when he returned, but she did not do the review herself or hand over to the colleague working the evening shift. That night I attended the hospital with my sister. I sat with nursing staff and made it very clear that I was concerned that Harris felt unsafe. The nurse contacted the on-call hospital manager for advice. He was told of the concerns and should have requested a medical review that night. He did nothing with the information. He did not initiate a review. NHS Borders omitted these 2 failures from their internal review. They were covered up until the FAI. The next day, Harris absconded from the ward. He was found on a main road and picked up by staff in a car. When he realised he was being returned to Huntlyburn, he threw himself from the car, which was travelling at more than 30 miles per hour, maybe as fast as 50 miles per hour, and he sustained severe injuries to his face and head, which required plastic surgery. Harris was not the first child to abscond from this adult ward. NHS Borders admit that there was no policy in place for managing this kind of situation, particularly no policy for safe transfer in a hospital vehicle. There were no beds in any YPU in Scotland at the time of Harris's admission, but staff did not actively engage with colleagues elsewhere to try to find a better solution when he was deteriorating, nor did they review him as to whether a detention order was required to mitigate the risk. At last, after his second life-threatening incident, a bed was finally made available in the young person's unit in Edinburgh. In the YPU, Harris calmed down almost immediately. He was no longer agitated. He never tried to abscond again. He showed what we already suspected. Harris wasn't the problem, the environment was. While Harris was in YPU, he was assessed for ADHD and autism. Unfortunately, this process resulted in mixed messages and further loss of trust in the doctors caring for him. Harris was diagnosed with ADHD and told that medication for ADHD would make him feel a whole lot better. It didn't. The first medication didn't work and caused side effects, and so did the second type of medication, so it was stopped. Years later, during the fatal accident inquiry, 3 different psychiatrists, including the expert witnesses for the Crown and the NHS, questioned whether Harris had ADHD at all. Harris also didn't think he had ADHD. Importantly, the diagnosis of ADHD lingered and continued to shape how professionals treated him, especially by the occupational therapist in 2020. While in the YPU, Harris was told he didn't have autism, which they said to him was a good thing. Then a few days before discharge, he was told that he did have autism. There was no time or effort made to talk about it. No time to help him come to terms with what that meant for him. No help for us as a family either. By the time Harris was discharged from hospital 2 months later, he had diagnoses of ADHD, autism and depression. In his mind, those labels of ADHD and autism didn't really help explain how he felt about himself. The explanations he got from people looking after him about these diagnoses were very superficial too. And over time, he internalised feeling awkward or confused in social interactions and came to the conclusion that he was a psychopath. This became a strong belief, despite the fact that he actually worried a lot about what other people thought of him. He was the exact opposite of a psychopath. The diagnosis of autism should have been an opportunity to understand some of Harris's feelings around communication, sensory overload, and anxiety that led to him becoming so unwell. None of the professionals that looked after Harris understood or made adaptations for the way that he was able to mask seeming okay while internally feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and ultimately unable to cope. In June 2018, Harris returned to school. He was determined to get back to normal life and he wanted to move forward. In January 2019, which was a year after his experience in Huntlyburn, he wrote a deeply personal essay for his higher English portfolio. He called it Escape. It was his account of Huntlyburn, this vivid, heartbreaking narrative of how alone and afraid he'd felt. This essay was later included as evidence in the fatal accident inquiry. Harris was followed up by the local CAMHS team after his discharge from the YPU in April of 2018 until his 18th birthday in June 2019. It was difficult to get him to attend appointments, but he did and said very little. He distrusted them after his experience in 2018. It was difficult for him to connect with them around his diagnosis of autism. That shouldn't have been a surprise, but it didn't occur to them that his experience in Huntlyburn was a barrier. He was transferred to the adult service, was seen once in clinic in October 2019 and discharged because there were no ongoing mental health issues, no symptoms of ADHD, and he was not on any medication. In May 2020, during the first COVID lockdown, Harris's mental health began to decline again. I noticed changes. He was very withdrawn, anxious, and exhibiting some strange behaviours. I emailed the adult psychiatrist who'd seen and discharged Harris just over 6 months earlier. She asked me to go through the GP to get a re-referral. On the 22nd of June, Harris would not attend the face-to-face appointment to see a trainee psychiatrist and occupational therapist, or OT, due to his lack of trust in mental health services. His sister and I attended instead. We described in detail what we were seeing, how he was struggling, how his behaviours had changed. The conclusion of that appointment was that the doctor did not think Harris was paranoid or psychotic. She felt that it would be best to have the OT as the front-facing professional with activity-based appointments. I agreed to this approach because I was told there would be consultant psychiatrist supervision and oversight and weekly team meetings. There was no consultant oversight. There were no weekly team meetings. The system around Harris was already falling apart and we didn't know. This is the point in our story where things began to escalate very quickly. Healthcare professionals did not in any way keep pace with Harris's declining well-being. Harris was aware of his mental health problems and terrified, now that he was 18 years old, of the possibility of an inpatient stay in Huntlyburn. Throughout July, I raised concerns again and again, in phone calls, in person, in emails. I told the OT that Harris was getting worse. He was completely shut down from the family, did not talk to us, wore headphones constantly, was irritable, agitated and not sleeping well. He also developed odd movements. I described his deterioration clearly and repeatedly, but the OT never brought my concerns to the team. On the 16th of July, on her first visit, nearly a month after this model of care was agreed, the OT took Harris for a cycle ride. I told her again how worried I was, that things were not okay. She saw the visit as a success. My concerns were not raised with the team. On the 23rd of July, Harris refused to come out of his bedroom and then ran out of the house, rather than engage with the OT. I expressed my concerns again, but they were not raised with the team. Then the OT went on holiday for 3 weeks, and during that time, no one was assigned to cover Harris's care. No contact, no monitoring, no support. So on the 27th of July, I reached out again, this time to our family GP. I wrote an email to him saying I was extremely worried about Harris, that I was out of ideas, that I didn't know what to do anymore. This wasn't a casual concern, this was a cry for help from a mother and a medical professional who knew something was very wrong. The GP was on holiday, but I didn't know that. He did reach out to the team when he returned, but no one acted. On the 30th of July, the trainee doctor discharged Harris from psychiatry. She did not tell the OT that she was doing this, neither did she tell me. She discharged Harris because the OT had not asked for psychiatry input for him, despite a clear deterioration in his mental health reported by me. I was still under the impression that his care was being regularly discussed in team meetings with consultant supervision. In fact, this had not happened at all. On the 15th of August, Harris disappeared with his sister's car. He didn't have a driving licence. I called the police. They came to the house and spoke kindly to Harris when I explained he was unwell. Harris said nothing. He sat silently staring into space, completely shut down. The next evening, the 16th of August, Harris had a full emotional collapse. He started shouting. He was clutching and tearing at his hair. He said, "It's the end." He was fixated on a misunderstanding from weeks earlier when he'd been out with a group of boys, which had grown out of proportion in his mind and was haunting him. I knew this needed urgent help. I quickly went to our neighbour GP. She suggested and provided me with diazepam for Harris, which he readily accepted. This calmed him down and he slept. The following morning, 17th of August, the OT arrived for a third visit. I told her everything about the car, the blank silence with the police, the shouting, the meltdown, the diazepam. I told her we were extremely worried about him. I asked about medication, as it was clear that Harris was not coping with very high levels of anxiety. She said nothing about what she would do with that information. She took Harris out for an activity for 50 minutes and left. She did not return and sit down with me. She did not reassure me that she would bring this urgently to the attention of the psychiatrist. She did not escalate his case. In the early hours of the 19th of August, Harris left the house while we were sleeping and took his own life. He was found by his dad later that afternoon. On the day Harris died, the OT finally brought his case to the psychiatric team meeting for the first time. Not because she was alarmed, not because of the car, the police, the silence, the meltdown, the diazepam, only because I had asked for medication. The consultant at that meeting was covering for her colleague. When she heard the OT's description of symptoms and events, she said that an urgent medical review was needed. But she said it could wait until her consultant colleague returned from leave. But Harris was already dead. After Harris's death, NHS Borders conducted their second significant adverse event review. It was published 14 months later in October 2021. This report concluded that there were no clinical failures. My husband and I would not accept this conclusion. We asked the Crown Office to conduct a fatal accident inquiry in January 2022. This finally took place in February 2025. We are expecting the Sheriff's determination in June 2025. I expect the Sheriff will say that Harris's death was not preventable, because the expert witnesses for the Crown and the NHS couldn't say that it was entirely preventable. But is suicide ever entirely preventable? The expert witness for the Crown had many criticisms of Harris's care from 2018 to 2020, but his concerns about Harris's management appear to me to have been drowned out. The Crown and the NHS conclude that Harris's experience of Huntly Burn did not directly contribute to his death, but in 2020, when he became unwell, it was completely on his mind. He talked about Huntly Burn, he was worried he would be sent back there now that he was an adult. It would make common sense to a lay person that this experience would stay with him, that he would be worried about it, that he would be worried about being sent back there now he was an adult. His school essay about the experience, which was submitted in evidence, reinforces this interpretation. In 2020, why was a proper psychiatric risk assessment not done or even attempted? Why was medication for his poor sleep and anxiety and agitation not considered at a much earlier stage? Why did the psychiatrist not remain in contact at all with us, his family? She left all the decisions about his mental state and level of risk with a member of the team who was not a doctor, not even a mental health specialist. How many times was I, Harris's mother, and a consultant paediatrician myself, ignored when I reported to the OT that he was deteriorating? The OT, adrift from psychiatric input, was allowed to see Harris purely through her narrow lens of addressing sensory needs. She was not feeding back my concerns to the psychiatrist. She was not working with the family. She saw Harris for less than 2 hours over a period of 5 weeks. I knew my son best. Most of the people giving evidence at the FAI had either never met him or spent only a few hours of his life with him. But this system is biased in their favour. It really is. I believe this was suicide caused by deteriorating mental health in a lad who struggled to understand himself and his high-functioning autism, who got very anxious, who overthought things, who was afraid. Not only that, but the prospect of more care, such as he had experienced in Huntly Burn, meant he saw no way out of his difficulties. The mental health team said his death was an impulsive act with untreated ADHD, when it was disputed that he even had ADHD. Autism carries an increased risk of suicide. This was never discussed with Harris or the family. This was not factored into the decision-making by mental health professionals in 2020. As the Sheriff noted in his personal view at a recent meeting with ourselves and the legal teams, the only person who seemed to show any care was the local GP. I agree. Compassion and care and interest for Harris's well-being was missing in 2018 and again in 2020. There was also a lack of knowledge and skill across the whole service in dealing with young people like Harris. And I fear that the NHS will get away with this again. This has taken nearly 5 years. What an ordeal to go through the process of an NHS Borders significant adverse event review and then fight for a fatal accident inquiry on top of losing my beloved son. Another much less important loss has been my career and my faith in the NHS for whom I worked for 30 years. But I've done this because I don't want this to happen again. It is a child's right to be safe. Keeping a child who is distressed on an adult psychiatric ward is not safe. For Harris, with the addition of autism, it had tragic consequences. Young people with autism need a trusted, knowledgeable, caring professional who can be easily available to them through these difficult years when they are at increased risk of suicide and mental health difficulties. This story won't come as a surprise to those who have a loved one with autism. If that person has a bad experience of a service or an individual, there will be failure to engage, which is really fear to engage. Harris was an intelligent young man who could mask his feelings very well. He had lost trust and confidence in them. My opinion, which I expressed in court, having been with him through all the difficulties in the last years of his life, was that mental health services did him more harm than good. Health professionals need to care and be compassionate. They need to gain the trust of autistic young people. They need to listen to the family and actively problem solve with them. They should accept they could lack knowledge and seek help. Input should not be a tick box exercise. Throughout the FAI, to our dismay, NHS Borders staff and their management team resolutely defended their position that there was absolutely nothing wrong with Harris's care. Nothing to learn. They would do the same again. But as the Sheriff has said to us, Harris's case is particularly tragic and sad because of this lack of care and interest. So sad for Harris, and potentially for another young person and their family in a similar situation in future. Has an FAI been worth it? Is it the right process to effect any change? We await the Sheriff's determination. It changes nothing for our family, but it should be an opportunity to demand better in future. Losing someone you love to suicide is utterly devastating and has changed our family's life forever. Despite the terrible pain of this loss, we knew from the outset that we wanted to support other young people who face similar difficulties. The Harris Trust was set up in March 2021 to support children and young people with mental health and/or neurodiversity by providing activities that they would enjoy, where they could meet like-minded peers, gain confidence and new skills. We have worked closely with schools in the Scottish Borders, with Selkirk Rugby Club and with the Mac Arts music venue. Through the charity, we've met many incredible individuals with their own stories to tell, and it has helped to have some purpose aside from our grief. Please have a look at our website and social media to find out more about our projects in the Scottish Borders. Scottish Autism campaigns and advocates for public policy that will create change in services or environments which do not accommodate or understand the needs of autistic people. Please see the link if you would like to get in touch with them about any issues that this video has raised for you. Thank you very much for listening.